Welcome to Determine OutLoud, our podcast series that's all about minding your business in contract management and source to pay. And now, your host, Buyers Meeting Point owner, Kelly Varner.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Determine OutLoud. Today, my guest is Micheal Behne, Vice President of Professional Services at Determine. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, Kelly. Nice to be with you.
So, as I said, you're the head of professional services, and being in that position allows you to see companies in varying industries and at different points in their maturity and procurement learning journey go through some relatively similar experiences. And probably one of those where you're able to draw the greatest comparisons is watching them go through implementations. Can you talk to me about some of the things that you commonly see during implementation with companies?
Sure. And you're absolutely right. And there are commonalities across the board. But folks typically come to us and start talking about features and functionality and how their IT group will be impacted and, how quickly can we get something done? And those are all good questions, but I would argue that sometimes those questions are premature. They're important, but, my counsel to folks that ask those kinds of questions is to begin with the end in mind and think about what you're trying to accomplish first. And then we'll get to those things. We'll start to address features and functionality, how IT is impacted, as well as how quickly or how long something might take to help you achieve the value you're hoping to get out of an implementation.
So obviously you're in good customer service mode, right, during these conversations, and you're trying to address the concerns, the inquiries that you're getting from companies. But if you could actually advise them, as opposed to these things that you do commonly see, some of which are more productive than others, although you see them all the time, what would you actually like to see more of? Where would you like to see more of a focus during implementation? In the beginning, and I do believe that if you consider what you're trying to accomplish, again, begin with the end in mind, and think about that throughout the planning process and then into implementation, you're going to be happier and you're going to have more success. But to do that, I would like to see people approach the conversation with a better understanding or more of a root cause analysis of what's causing the problem that has us thinking that we need to implement a system. I heard the term prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. Let's not do something until we're sure we're solving the right problem. And I think that's kind of a good mindset to have as you begin the implementation process. The other thing that I would urge people to do is to clearly express the problem to be solved. It's one thing to get to that root cause, but to express that in a manner that your partners understand, that your implementation team understand, is truly important to ensure that they're aligned and that they keep their eye on the ball throughout the implementation process. And you would be amazed at how difficult that is, Kelly, for people to actually put the problem in words. I can imagine.
And then, And if folks could, express to us, as an example, determine their vision for how the use of a tool, Determine's tool set or solution set can be used to create value within their organization, then I believe that you're set up to create an implementation that's going to be successful. And I guess I would argue one more thing, or urge one more thing, and that is don't forget to consider approaches to adopting the system and the change management and ensuring that people actually are on board with the solution that you've chosen and how it's implemented and how it's to be used in the future to drive value. Kelly, I tried to think of a story that might clarify what I'm trying to say. And I was at Home Depot. I'm a wannabe handyman, and I'm not very good, but I was looking at hammers, and there are all kinds of hammers there at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and the prices run the gamut. $9 to $59, and it occurred to me that regardless of how much I spent on the hammer, it really was a function of how I used that hammer, and my skill set and my vision for creating something that was going to drive the end result. And for me, a $9 hammer or a $59 hammer is going to get the same result because I'm not a skilled craftsman. But if you take that metaphor and apply it to the tool set or solution set that you're implementing, I think it sets up an interesting conversation, and that is you've purchased a tool and you're only going to get value out of it. You're only going to achieve success with your project goals if you use the tool. And it's often an underappreciated mindset that I see in folks that are implementing.
That is such a great metaphor. And I think it's funny because I would imagine the majority of us, and maybe even more so the majority of us listening into this podcast that are in some area of procurement or contract management, we find ourselves in the exact same position, right? You're standing there and you're thinking, all I need to do is hang that one picture, right? Or knock that one piece of woodworking back into alignment. Do I really need to stand here all day and weigh the relative measures, or am I better off picking something that's clearly going to knock that nail in, and moving on? So if let's stay with that.
Not using the heel of your shoe.
Yeah, exactly, and not hitting with the claw end first, right? So if we're looking to get procurement to choose the hammer and get to work and make sure that they use it, right? You have to actually bring it in out of the car. Don't leave it in the plastic bag. Put it right to work. Mm-hmm. What are some of the recommendations that you have to make sure that we get through the implementation successfully so that we maximize that adoption and get the intended usage and value out of the system?
Sure, and that's a great question, and lots of answers and opinions about that. But I would say to those that might be listening that the number one thing that you can do as a sponsor of an implementation of a CLM, as an example, is be an active sponsor. Do more than just lend your name to the project, and drive adoption. Be a cheerleader. Clarify the vision. Reinforce the vision of what you're trying to accomplish continually across the implementation process. I would say, as being an active sponsor, focus on the team that you bring to bear on the implementation, and make sure that that team is appropriately skilled and appropriately aligned on solving the problems and creating value. Often we see people that are assigned to a project as an additional duty because they were available. And I would urge people to consider that you're making an investment to improve the organization and contribute to the bottom line, and to make sure that you're bringing the right team to make that happen. Don't risk your implementation by not giving that some thought. And once you have that right team in place, make sure you set the stage. Talk to the team about the analysis that you did that identified the problem and the value that you're trying to get out of the system once it's implemented. And again, I think that it's that mindset and that focus that allows the team to make the right choices for your organization throughout the implementation that gets you to success, or however you define success. And I would say start small. Make sure that it's a managed scope and you're implementing and measuring.
True.
And then when you do have success, that you celebrate often. And in the back of your mind, know that it's always important to continually improve once you've implemented your system and you've measured and celebrated.
Now, given how focused procurement tends to be on managing these implementations, focusing on and tracking adoption, right? It would be easy for a lot of us to sit back and say, I hear you, that these things happen, but not me. not my organization, right? I wouldn't go down that road. Other people might fall into that, but I wouldn't. Without putting you on the spot and asking you to actually name any names, can you give me an example maybe of an actual situation you saw that illustrates some of these principles about implementation and adoption that we've been talking about?
I do. We have a number of successful clients, but one comes to mind. And, over the last few months, we had a client or a partner whose business is going gangbusters. And they raised some money and they had a significant influx of capital, which is a great thing. Clearly, the market or investors are seeing the value in this organization and betting on growth. The procurement organization, the contracting organization, realized, based on this influx of capital, that their jobs, they were going to get really busy really quick. And there was an edict that, hey, we're not adding headcount. Your job is to do what we need to have done from a contracting and procurement standpoint, without adding headcount. So you're going to have to figure out a way to scale and be efficient and contribute to the business, a business that's growing. And I believe the number they used was, they had expected quadruple growth within a very short period of time. So as we worked with this organization, we had them clearly express their business goal of implementing a CLM system that was going to drive efficiencies across their process so that they could meet the increasing demand for contracts without loss of quality, with auditability and manage risk, without adding headcounts. And ultimately, we were able to do that. We implemented with this customer in about 12 weeks. They went live very successfully. It was well adopted, the system. And with them, we believe, based on their response to us, that they achieved the ROI that they had hoped to achieve within 1 quarter of use. And I would attribute that success to the things that they did. They had a great executive sponsor. They had clear objectives, clear measures of success. And when they implemented, they kept those things front of mind. And they partnered with us very well to achieve the objectives they wanted to achieve.
And what a great example. Obviously, it's nice to see an implementation of any system, right, CLM in this case, go well. But how fantastic that their business driver was, like you said, that expectation for growth. And of course, we're all looking at different expectations, right? Whether it happens to be preparing the organization to scale or maybe hedging against uncertain times that are coming. What would you say are sort of the nets of what we've talked about today in terms of not only meeting, but then exceeding expectations associated with implementation and adoption?
Sure. I would say as a net, keep front of mind that you're not going to achieve or you're unlikely to achieve success and the value that you had hoped for if you don't consider adoption, if you don't consider the use of the tool set to achieve some purpose. Remember the hammer metaphor. Secondly, I would say as sponsors and as leaders that are listening today, that you must and you're able to drive the success of the project. Again, focus on adoption, focus on the clarity of why you're doing what you're doing, and you commit to making that happen. Finally, I would say measure, use the solution, use the heck out of it, and then celebrate the successes. It's interesting to me as an observer for many years that when you celebrate these successes and people see their coworkers succeeding by using a tool that has been implemented, how quickly they jump on board and become champions and you see this viral spread and adoption of the tool, and it's amazing what happens.
Well, and as we wrap here, hopefully you'll forgive. I have to jump on your metaphor. What was the classic old story about the blind carpenter, right? He picked up his hammer and saw. So if the takeaway is choose the tool, get to work, use the functionality, measure and manage. Organizations that take that kind of an approach to implementation and adoption are clearly going to make it further down the road towards those expectations, hopefully that they end up exceeding, than organizations that fall into some of the early traps that we talked about. Mike, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. Be sure to look out for our next episode of Determine Out Loud.